Hi, my name is Deborah Richards, and I'm one of the co-founders of Open Design Collective. And I'm just going to start by positioning this lecture and going over the agenda. So we just had an activity. I'm going to give a brief overview of today's lecture, and I'm really excited to welcome Sean Washington, LaTasha Timberlake, and to speak today, and also Afia Wilkins, who's part of our core project team, will also be talking. Okay, so this is a brief overview of where we are in the project. So during the last session, we discussed lay of the land, policy, process, and geography. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about urban ecology and social spaces. Then we're going to continue with housing, commerce, retail, and public streets. Then into design and aesthetics. And our final sort of reflection session will be urban economics and development. In March, we're going to transition into the actual visioning. So all of the information that we've gathered and shared with each other will be the basis of design for the visioning to make sure that it's really rooted in the community, in your desires, and in your reflection that you've had over this time. So urban ecology. Urban ecology is the relationship between living creatures and their environments and the process that makes sort of life happen in human-dominated environments, right? So that's why it's not just ecology, but urban ecology. And so human-dominated environments like a city, like Oklahoma City. What is urban design? This is something that we'll be talking a lot about a little bit in this session and in upcoming sessions. So urban design is the design of the physical features and social spaces of cities. It is a design field that's in between the scale of city planning and architecture, or the design of buildings. So in the images to the right, you sort of see these abstract drawings. One is in a plan view where they're drawing building locations and streets, and the other is a perspective where they're showing buildings along the city street with some existing buildings that also exist. And during our visioning process, we're going to start to imagine these kinds of spaces. They may look a little bit more realistic than the images that I have up on the screen, but I didn't want to show realistic images on the screen right now because each community is unique and each community has unique desires. So we don't really know yet what that vision will look like for the South of 8th project. When we think about urban ecology, where do we usually think it exists in our cities? Oftentimes people think about urban parks. So this is an image of Scissortail Park and Martin Park. But we should also recognize that urban ecology exists just between buildings, right? It is the space all around us. Oftentimes we might think, well, the streets are in between buildings, but the streets are also part of that landscape and that ecology. And the more we use sort of green and sustainable materials, the more that those streetscapes and urban infrastructure may appear more like what you traditionally think of as ecological systems. So urban ecology is the backdrop to our social connections, and it is the space where we connect with people. This is an image of the One OKC Block Party hosted by Northeast OKC Renaissance in Washington Park. And urban ecology, again, is a space where we connect with each other between buildings. This is Project Row Houses in the 3rd Ward in Houston. So there is a relationship between urban ecology and public space. And the Oftentimes urban ecology is existing in public space. Sometimes it's existing also in people's private backyards. And public space examples include everything from parks to streets and pathways. These are the spaces that the public can use. Spaces that engage public spaces are also really important, such as front porches, outdoor seating of restaurants. These spaces are privately owned, but they engage the public space, they enhance it, and they make it more lively. So there's sort of this transition between spaces that are super public and those that become a little bit more private. Why is public space important? Public space is a space, and spaces that engage public space build communities by creating these networks of movement, establishing pathways of connection, providing safe spaces, safety in the sense that when there's a lot of people out moving around, you feel comforted knowing that there's other people kind of in the space. And there's also a sense of freedom in public space. For example, in a park, you may feel free to do certain kind of activities. And in some cases, you don't also. So that's something to kind of think about. And these connection spaces increase economic growth. Everybody wants a restaurant that's adjacent to a nice public space because that enhances your restaurant and encourages more people to come there and want to be there. So what is considered good public space? Public space is really just an opening or a void, right? And so it's the idea of place and creating place that makes a good public space. So places are created when there's collaboration and community coming together over time to contribute to the definition of the place, to contribute to the aesthetic, the identity of the place. When we think about places that new public spaces, then we might think about, okay, in order to create a place that people can identify with, feel welcome with, and meet the needs of the community, then we need to come together as a community to start to define what a place or a public space should look like. Here, this slide just kind of emphasizes that the sense of place is very much related to heritage and personal experiences. So if you know that your parents went to a place or family members went to a place, that may create a stronger connection to that place. And then if it's a new place, just the fact that you go there often and have memories there and created memories there can create a strong sense of place. The places are locations where there's social interactions, where you're going to meet people. The activities that are in these spaces reflect the community and the culture of the community and what the community wants to see there. We can also think of, on the other hand, the flip side is spaces where people don't go and they're just voids. They've been planned without kind of the input of the community and they're empty. Have you guys seen open public spaces that are look maybe beautiful, but nobody uses them? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yes, it's all over. So creating a sense of place and outdoor space with ecology, social spaces is sort of a process and needs to be collaboratively made together. Briefly, I just want to mention also that when we think of urban ecology and ecology in general, it's human connection with nature. And that connection has a lot of benefits, mental and health, physical and mental health benefits. Wellness and joy. These spaces often Being outdoor in nature allows you to de-stress. There's been many studies on that. Connection to nature allows you to de-stress, break down barriers, and sort of create stronger connections with nature. And if you're less stressed, also create stronger connections with the community that you're in, with other people. Wellness and joy, again, there's different organizations that are really focusing on this work and getting people to connect with nature. Girl Trek is an organization that focuses on African-American women and girls to develop a daily habit of walking to improve physical and mental health outcomes. And Outdoor Afro is an organization to inspire joy and fellowship with nature, provide opportunities to experience nature, such as hiking, fishing, swimming, and also provide kind of the skill set and knowledge about nature to make sure that people feel comfortable doing those activities. Regeneration, healing, and creativity. Again, studies show that nature is essential to holistic well-being, reduces stress, mitigates health disparities, and evokes creative thinking by making us curious, allowing us to de-stress and focus on creative solutions. We can also look to nature for solutions. So the natural systems have been evolving and creating over time. And there's a lot of people now looking into emergent strategies, right? Like, how do birds work together in a flock? How can one small being work as a group and affect change in a group? Biomimicry is the idea, again, that we can look to nature for solutions. And we also just want to be aware of all of the historical connections of how people in the past have looked towards nature for solutions. One example is Harriet Tubman, who looked to stars, migrating birds, moss growing on trees as a wayfinding device as part of the Underground Railroad movement. And I just want to make one final comment before I bring Sean up here, which is that these public spaces, there needs to be many. Even if we bring all of our community together to talk about what they want to see in a public space, one public space could never address the variety of perspectives and needs from an entire community. So we can be thinking about that as well. All right, so Sean Washington is a naturalist, educator, and science communicator at OKC Parks, as well as with other community-based organizations. And he's going to talk a little bit more specifically about ecology. Yes.
Vanessa is commenting on our Facebook Live, and she is saying, Kindred Spirits, she wants to do a shout out to Kindred Spirits for being a thriving public space in Northeast Oklahoma City. And she says, nature has all the answers, we just need to listen.
Okay, could everybody hear Valona speak?
No, not stops.
Well, also on the live. Because
on the live. Oh.
You want to just say that again, Valona?
So I have Vanessa Morrison's making comments on our Facebook Live video, giving a shout out to Kindred Spirits for being a thriving public space in Northeast Oklahoma City, and that nature has all the answers, we just need to listen.
I'll just check to make sure that's on. Yes, we can ask questions at the end. How about? We are behind. Sorry, guys.
What is ecology? Plain and simply, by definition, it is the branch of biology that deals with the relations of organisms to one another and their physical surroundings. In a strict translation, it means, the word ecology means the study of home. Now, my job is, as a naturalist, I go and introduce people to wildlife. And I find that very funny because once I talk about it and show them all these things, I let them know that like you've lived around nature your entire life, even when you didn't think you were. Being at a park in the middle of the city, as Martin Park is, many people come there just to see deer, or they see birds, or they see these cool looking butterflies they didn't know existed. And I'm like, you have them in your backyard. You have them living right outside your house. You just have to slow down, breathe, and notice that this is the study of home. That is where you live, and all these things are right there. And one of the things that I've always focused on is how people interact with the environment and what that makes them feel, because that is unnecessarily important, that we have this really intense feeling when we see something. People feel differently when they see a snake on the ground versus when they see a butterfly flying across in front of their car. It changes your emotions towards the outdoors. And why does that change it? And what does it change it to? Now, let me take a breath and drink some water, because this is a topic I love and I will ramble on. And I have to keep it to 30 minutes, I promise. So when I tell people what I do, I tell them that my job is to get to know and understand Mother Nature. And like many mothers, she has her own pillars of her personality. She can be kind and stubborn, and she is extremely passionate. But the two main ones that I've gotten to know best are that she has two main ideas of how life should be. One is that what was will not be. Change is a constant, and everything in the environment is built by and measured by change. Some of these may be small, for example, the changing temperatures from winter to spring, or as small as like the rising tide, the coming and going of tides every day. Others might be a bit bigger, like mass extinctions or global climate change and things like that. But either way, change is her constant, and she understands that. The other one is that no matter what, that she is here to be listened to. Information is there if you're willing to stop and listen. We get a lot of things, and as we mentioned earlier, biomimicry is a major point in this. We learned about different sciences, different studies about different ways society can work, different machines, and the ways that we live life. She's been doing it for millions of years, so she understands the answers better than we can think of. So now we get to where we are and why we're connected to this place. The land we're connected to. Now, Oklahoma, I have this talk almost every day at work because there's someone who comes in and says, there's not much to do here. There's not much wildlife here. We're just plains. We aren't, and I hate that argument. I hate it so much. First off, if you were to look at this map right here, it showcases that there are so many different ecosystems here. Oklahoma is special in that respect. We are one of only 4 states in the nation with more than 10 ecoregions. Now, an ecoregion is basically just like a different habitat type where you have forest versus a type of grassland and other types of grasslands and things like that. So if you look on the tip of the panhandle, we have what's called the Southwest Tablelands, where on a good year, it looks like a really lush desert. There's tons of cool plants and flowers. On a bad year, it's just a desert. And then if you head to the southeast section of the state, you have cypress swamps where you have these trees that break the 100-foot mark. Not many trees in Oklahoma do that. And they're sitting in these dense swamps where there are potentially even alligators that naturally live there. Oklahoma is also extremely biodiverse because we have so many different habitats in it. We are home to over 82 different species of reptiles. Over 450 different birds live throughout the state. 200 of those stay year round, the others migrate through. And butterflies, we are home to over 170 different ones, and the nation's largest and smallest species both call Oklahoma home. Both actually can be seen in Oklahoma City, who would have guessed. Now, beyond that, we aren't talking about the whole state, we're talking about this one little area. So Oklahoma City sits right on the edge of where the orange meets the red. We are on the edge of what's called the Cross Timbers ecoregion. And that is the edge of two amazingly diverse and complex worlds. On the west end of the state, you start to see the Great Plains begin, this huge expansive area dominated by grasses, and there's fewer trees. But as you look eastward, you start to see the trees become denser and taller, hardwood forests begin, and you start to see that change. So we literally sit on the edge of two complex and biodiverse worlds, and we get the best of both. We see all of the different birds, like the painted bunting at the bottom and the queen butterfly up top. Both of those that should be totally different, both of them can be seen in this one little area because we are at the edge of two amazing places. And that biodiversity isn't static. One of the things that I think is really important is the idea of a shifting baseline. Around the turn of the 20th century, when we, of course, became the year 1900, before Oklahoma was a state, fireflies were everywhere in the US, and they were so amazing that people stopped thinking about them. It was so complex, you'd begin to, from the first rain of May to the first freeze of August or of September, there'd be tens of thousands of fireflies everywhere, no matter what. As we began to build our cities and use things and create stuff, we slowly started to see that number drop. And we started to continue to notice that change began to happen without our real acknowledgement of the fact that that was going away. And it got down to a point where last week I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers that also works at Martin Park. And she was telling me how excited she was this year that she saw 10 fireflies in her backyard. And I thought, that is utterly depressing as a naturalist, because that means that while she's excited, and I'm glad that she was excited to see that, that means that the baseline of what is okay and what is normal has changed so much that 10,000 has become 10. And seeing that really does mean that we're losing so much of what we had and what we could have. But that's not even the worst part of it. The worst end of the spectrum here comes when you think about an area called Quail Springs. Now, everyone here, I believe, is from Oklahoma, correct? So we all know Quail Springs, big mall, there's like a strip area, there's restaurants over next to it. There's this huge thing. Did you know, and I did this while researching the talk, that the entire mall itself is 1 million square foot. It's 25 acres and about 19 football fields. That's just the mall, not all the strip area that came up after it. But why is it called Quail Springs? It was named because there were tons of this bird right here, the northern bobwhite quail. They used to live there, and people before that mall was built and before that area was developed could wake up every morning, go outside and hear their call, which is that'd be a morning thing. You'd begin to hear it every day. Post the development and creating all of that area and turning these huge expanses of patchwork prairie with cross timbers, woodlands, and turning all that into concrete and buildings and new restaurants and things like that. The last bobwhite song was heard in 2018 from one individual who believes he heard it while standing at a gas station. And weirdly, I find that in a sort of a dark irony, because we've named this area after the quail. We've named it, and that's one thing it was known for. The culture before the mall was there was there are quail here. You can go and listen to them whenever. You can hear them every morning as you drink your coffee. And now it's gone. Everything that we knew of that place, the culture that grew from that one little thing, has completely disappeared. But there's the other side of that coin, and because that culture is gone, people have shifted their baseline. I had an original photo of a quail that I took. This is not it. I wish I could get a clear photo like this, but I had to travel 2.5 hours out of the city in order to find a quail to take a photo that I wanted to use for this. That is depressing to think that there's an area in the city called Quail Springs, that this should have been something that I'd be able to see anywhere, that I should be able to walk outside my house where I live right now and hear them in some way, shape, or form, but that's not the case. The baseline has shifted so much so that now we've completely lost the idea that that should be here, that there should be a culture around the idea of the wildlife that was there. and it's completely gone. But even though that is very dark, and I apologize if I've just made everybody sad, that doesn't have to be the case, and things can change in such an amazing way. The first one is you have to view development as not either or, but and. We view the idea of being environmentally friendly and developing as two opposite sides of a coin, but we don't realize the coin's still the same. It's still 25 cents. It's still whatever you want to make that worth. You don't have to choose what side you want to pick. And once we stop thinking about it as it's this or that, you begin to create new things. And those new things invite new people, invite more business, invite more things that can happen, and don't kill off the culture that created the area. And with that, we can build such amazing places that not only are good for people, but good for the environment. And in being good for the environment, are better for people. And there's just so much good there. And genuinely, it's amazing. The next step in that is making nature accessible and tangible to the public. Most people, especially Black people in many urban cultures, never had access to the environment in the same way that other communities have. For a wide variety of reasons, we never got the idea to feel like it was safe to be outdoors. We never got the idea to feel like it was safe to go camping, to be birding, to go and enjoy nature in the same way that other people could. So we need to ensure that we make that safe, we make that accessible. Entice people to put up bird feeders in the yard, even if it's small. Just put up that, see what birds come out, and then you start to learn more, start to see more, invite yourself to make the invitation theirs to take, not for yours to give. The last section is make the ecology equal to the destination. And for this, I have a really great example. So on here, there's a map on the right. I'm sorry, I tried to figure out a way to make this not look cluttered, but these are the best 3 photos I could find for this. That is a photo of ruby-throated hummingbirds, the most common hummingbird in North America. They're amazing and people love seeing them. Now, every fall, they fly down to one little spot in Texas. And I'll leave that there for just half a second. If you look at the second photo down, there is a little photo of like a coastal city. That is Rockport, Texas. For 11 months out of the year, Rockport, Texas is your usual coastal city, relatively high price. There's tons of houses. People have these beautiful yards and they've got boats. It's its own perfect thing. But for 1 week in September, everything changes. The city becomes from this more separated and like isolated rich city to everyone flocks to this one area. Normally it's the second week of September. Everyone dons red clothing. Everyone puts up flowers. Everything changes. Hummingbirds fly down there because that is the stopping area for hummingbirds before they cross over the Gulf of Mexico. So they've created a huge festival that celebrates this one thing that happens only here every year. And I'm not saying we have to turn the whole city into a big festival for wildlife, but the same thing could happen on the street. For example, turning a certain tree that happens to have tons of these certain butterflies that come up every few years, making that its own smaller destination. Each little piece has its own energy that it can keep. And if we skip over that, we tend to lose that. So I do ask that when we develop, we try not to create more issues like Quail Springs, that we start to see places for what they are, what they had, and what they can be. Without dropping something else, we can create something new and build more. Thank you.
A lot of great information. No questions at this time.
Do you guys think we need to take a break or should we take a break? All right, let's take a short break here.
Thank you. I was kind of nervous the whole time.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody did when you just telling you nobody. Did not make I didn't think of that. Nobody was thinking of that. And then one more step, now I was like, that like, all right, guys. All right, guys, let's get started.
I'm transitioning using the mouse. Okay.
All right, guys, I'm going to introduce our next guest speaker. We're going to have LaTasha Timberlake, who is the founder and executive director of Lillian Timber Farms. She is Lillian Timber Farms is educational and sustainable 501c3. Get it together. Farm dedicated to growing and trading organic produce and products for healthy living practices in underserved communities. LaTasha will be sharing about the cultural programming of her organization and how food connects to ecology. Thank you so much, LaTasha, for being here. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I also like to tell people that I'm also proud of the East Side. So born and raised in Northeast Oklahoma City, and I like to preface with that all the time because people typically think that I am from the East Coast anytime I go anywhere. And so I love letting them know that I am from Oklahoma, and specifically on the east side of Oklahoma City, just so people can understand like what love, growth, and mentors can do for you when you have them in your life and you have a community backing you. There we go. So I want to kind of just start off with, and this is our tag for Lillian Timber Farms. Change begins with what we eat. And what happened was that I had the opportunity to come back home to Oklahoma and do something really great, not only for my community, but for the city and for the state. And at that time in my life, I was really working a lot with holistic medicine and working in nature. And I had done some farming work and some gardening work. And when COVID hit, I had the opportunity to be back home, and I wanted to maximize my time being here and think about what that really looked like. And so I got with a couple of friends, and I always have these ideas of like, you know, what I could do. And so I thought about, why don't I help create and build community gardens in our neighborhood? And at that time, food insecurity was a really big buzzword, and different initiatives happening around specifically Northeast Oklahoma City. And so a couple of friends and I, we talked about like what we could really do. And so one of my great friends, and who's also a brother, he had a vacant lot off of Northeast 23rd and Lottie. And so I was like, can I put a garden there? And I know at the time, he probably didn't know that it would grow into a nonprofit organization. And so that's really how Lillian Timber Farms came about, through this notion of, or this idea of what we call food insecurity or food desert or food insufficiency. But to be honest, I really don't like to be like a part of that in terms of it being like this movement, because we've always had enough food. There will always be enough food. The issue is really the access. And the issue is really about the knowledge and the understanding of food. And so through using community gardens, it is being able to help people understand really what it is in terms of how food really works with us, right? Especially when we think of natural food and we think of produce. And so what I just really want to encourage people in terms of when we're thinking about developing, I think about when I grew up off of 6th in Massachusetts, how we would get in trouble for jumping someone's fence because there were peach trees and there were apple trees. Or you had Miss Lawson that lived next door that had her own garden, you know, in her backyard. And think about like when we're talking about landscaping, we're talking about community, we're also talking about these things because at the end of the day, food is what brings everyone together. No matter if it's someone that's existing in the community or someone that has come from somewhere else, and they moved into the community. That's where the notion of when a neighbor comes in some communities, you knock on the door and then they bring you chocolate chip cookies. In others, it may be some greens and cornbread, you know, so. And so thinking about ideally, like really how food brings us together and our mindset around food. And what I have experienced and what I see is that there is this gap or this lack of knowledge and understanding really what food can bring to us. So one of the things that we talk about when we are working in the garden and I have volunteers come in is color and how we get hues from some of the food. So it's not just about like, oh, there's a dye, but it comes from a food product. And even medicine, it comes from a food product. And so utilizing these spaces that we can create to really bring knowledge about what food can do for our communities, even in terms of design. Like when I look at different furniture, when I look at different materials, like I think about food, you know, a moon back sofa, that's a banana, that's a curve, you know, and a banana. And so really thinking about how our food knowledge really talks about even our wellness and how we can create opportunities for like really understanding what it is that we are eating. So we can have grocery stores, we can have markets, but if we're really not in tune with what it is that we're eating in those places, and how they really nourish our mindset and the way that we think, because if I'm sick and I can't move, I can't bring to my community, I can't give back to my community. And I really think about some of the things that we are given to feed ourselves, and not to diminish anybody's work, but you can give somebody a food box, but if they don't know how to use the food that is in that box, they are still insecure food because they're still going to go hungry. We can give someone a food box, but if they don't have running water or electricity or their gas isn't on to utilize their food, they are still insecure food. So being even more intentional in our knowledge of what it is that we are giving when we give those things. And so that brings me into understanding food culture. And there's this huge, what I would like to say, movement in terms of food culture. And you'll see it on Instagram, and people, every time someone eats, they're taking a picture of what they eat. You know, and so food has this opportunity now, like food's a superstar, you know, food is doing the thing, you know, but how is it really bringing people together and being very intentional with that? And how does it really build community? And so for me, if we really think about some of these public spaces that we can have that incorporate food in many different ways, it doesn't necessarily have to be a garden, or it doesn't necessarily have to be, of course, it can even be restaurants that are, you know, a part of these developments. Like, how are they really intentionally building community? And I think about Kindred Spirits in terms of the programming that they have. Like, it is about building community, and it's about networking, and you can go and I may have an idea about something, and then someone at that event may be the generator for that idea. And so that's utilizing food, you know, to build community. So let's be very intentional in terms of how I'm building community, utilizing food culture, and thinking about how that can be structuralized in some of our neighborhoods. One of the things that I see is that there's this separation in terms of how we engage with food. So for example, we have a plethora of people that are in what I like to call small business that has the opportunity to become big business. But because we really don't have the infrastructures for that, a lot of times they just stay small business. And so we have this opportunity to create these instructional urban kitchens where you not only are helping business owners, but you're also being able to help educate children. And so we could design and have an opportunity where we may use a community garden, and then we're getting the produce, or we're getting the other things from other resources to bring into these kitchens, and teaching people how to cook the things that are in the food box. Or if I know my electricity is off or I don't have gas, then I can go and prepare my meals there. So it's, for me, I kind of think of this as this new design to a soup kitchen, where people are not just going there to get something, but they're actually being involved in the kitchen themselves, and they can cook what they need to for their family and then take it, or maybe even eat it there. And then also utilizing these urban kitchens in a way to teach about the wellness, you know, portion. So if you have a portion of the community that is dealing with diabetes or high blood pressure, because you can go and sit and they can give you the information, but if I actually show you how you can make a better alternative for your sugar crave, right? Then I'm actually not only educating you, but I'm actually also allowing you to be engaged in it and know how to do it and make it very practical. And then I also think about, in terms of food culture, outdoor learning spaces. So not just having a community garden that is just there, one of the biggest questions I get all the time is that it's free, like we can just come, you know, and yes, you can just show up, you know, and not only will you be able to harvest and plant, but we also have opportunities where people are engaged with mental health speakers. We've had different artists come out and do different programming in terms of movement and to get circulation going. And so you have these opportunities to have these outdoor learning spaces that is just more than just about the food. We also did a reading project there for young students over the summer and kind of early spring. And so you have these outdoor learning spaces that really become alive, and they're not just there to make the neighborhood look good, but they're a part of the neighborhood. They're a part of the heartbeat as well. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to really think about what food culture does for some of the projects that we are wanting to incorporate. So to be honest, this is the favorite part about the work that I do, and it is nature and wellness. And I think about the community garden from a space of being our local way to heal. And for me, it's not just even having the opportunity to eat the things that are there, but sometimes just being in the nature. And Sean kind of talked about this a little earlier. Sometimes it's just being in the presence of something that can lift your spirits. And one of the things when people come to the gardens, like immediately they just feel this sense of like family and community, and just like whatever stress or whatever was going on, they kind of have the opportunity of letting it go. And so when I think about the infrastructure, I have to go back to my neighborhood in which I grew up in. And I talked a little bit about the peach trees, but I also think about Ms. Galveston's, her rose bushes. And I think about how they would bloom, and maybe the night before in the community. And at that time when I was growing up, that's when PCP was prevalent. And so then we called it whack. So people would like kind of go crazy. They get naked and run through the street, right? But then as a child, so you have this trauma that happens, but then the next day, you're playing, you're riding your bike, and then you also see this beauty, that is happening too. And so you kind of forget about those other things that have happened in the community. And for me, when I came home, it kind of hurt because I saw that the area is sick. Like I could see it. My grandma used to say, "Oh, I can see it on you." So I could see it on the neighborhood because I could see how the buildings were decapitating and the old houses. And even though the city may have not gotten to that yard, I remember back in the day, somebody would have cut the yard anyway and not waited for the city to do it or waited for somebody to get fined. And so for me, I think about the nature and the wellness of what the things look like. And I think about some of the buildings that we have allowed to just go barren. And I think about bringing in these new developments and these things like that. But I think first we have to heal it, right? Because you can make something look good on the outside, but the inside could still be nasty and ugly. And so for me, I just want us to really think about the wellness of a community, and not just from the aspect of trying to make it look better, but how are we really helping people feel better, think differently, get what the resources that they really need to, you know, change their lives in order to change the lives of their small niece or their small nephew. And so with that, there's this opportunity for us to have these edible food forests. And so Sean talked about this, like having development that is not where it's like one thing or the other, but that encompasses everything, you know, and think about having, for example, if you could have houses, you know, surrounding or, you know, implemented into like Scissortail Park. And not it just be standalone and just there and something that you have to go to, but something that is already there and is a part of you. And you don't have to teach children how to play in a park because they've always grown up in a park, you know, and they know what a roly-poly is and how to identify that. And they know that, oh, I may not, even though it may look a little scary, you know, I may not want to swat at the bee or the butterfly because I know that it's a part of this ecosystem and that it is feeding off the flowers. And then I know that Lillian Timber Farms, they're keeping bees, and then that bee is going to go back to the hive, and then we're going to use that honey, and then maybe Miss, you know, Barker's going to sell that honey when we have our community market. And so for me, that's what I think about when I think about bringing nature and wellness together and bringing these projects together. So one of the things that we are really doing a lot of work with this year are pollinator gardens. And it is when I think about landscaping, something that is very easy. And a lot of times, even myself, I'm going through the process of building a home in our area, and they talk about, well, what do you landscaping, you know, and then they give you a price. And I'm like, I don't need to buy those bushes. Like, you know, I need some wild seeds. And I'm gonna plant some pollinator gardens, and that's gonna be my landscaping for the front of my house, you know, but really thinking about how we can kind of even be intentional with some of our landscaping, using some of the different types of gardens, like even rock gardens. And I even think about even produce gardens are beautiful in front of homes, and thinking about like I love that the winter cabbages that people use for landscaping in the wintertime. And so just really, you know, giving ourselves an opportunity to be open to change in a what one of my mentors says, in a macro way. And so then that takes us to collaboration. And before I go in deep into it, one of the things I just want us to kind of think about, and I'm gonna put it out there. Wouldn't it be beautiful if we could come together for some of our city and state initiatives, the way we come together when we want to represent OU and OSU? I just wanted to sit there right there. So when I think about collaboration, one of the things that really comes to mind for me is really getting everybody to work together. And I know that it's very challenging at times, but I think it's also very simple. I think what happens is that we always think of everything as an individual thing. So for example, we have a lot of different projects that are happening, you know, at schools. And I've been intentional when I say it's at a school, because what happens is you have these organizations, just like Lillian Timber Farms, they get these ideas, they get finances for it, and then they come to the school, and then they put it in there, and then they leave. And then there's no sustainability. And so it's like, oh, we did that at such and such, instead of we are a part of this with such and such. And so I think that when we talk about collaboration, it's how we really working together and being there. And I think about our churches. For me, I drive around all of the time and I see all of these vacant churches that are sitting on lots. They could be great opportunities for us to not have to build anything new, but utilize something that is there. But because we have a lot of people that are not informed, a lot of times they feel like something is being taken away from them instead of how something can be contributed to something else. And then businesses and organizations. I think that, you know, we have a great opportunity for us to, what I like to call, live together. I was at an organization yesterday and they were talking about office space, and I was like, oh, you all have an empty corner? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, have you ever thought about, you know, having other organizations come in and utilize it, not just for their office space, but also for the opportunity to collaborate? And there are a lot of different things happening in the city that, and you may say, oh, I know such and such, and oh, they know, oh, but you didn't know that you knew them. And so we have this opportunity because a lot of us are doing the same work, but we just aren't doing it together. And so you may have, for example, there are, I don't know how many different organizations doing the, what are the food, the boxes? I forgot what they're called. So they have the wooden boxes. So we have a lot of different organizations doing those boxes, but I was thinking, like, what if they all came together? Because I see them sometimes looking for donations, looking for volunteers to go refill the boxes, but you can come together, and so then you just have this schedule where each organization is responsible for making sure that the boxes have everything that they need. And so I don't have to try to go out and outsource something. It's like I already have people within that are working together for that. And so for me, I think about Okies for Monarchs. Like, they really do that. So I had an opportunity to receive a grant through Oklahoma City Zoo with Okies for Monarchs to help Millwood Arts Academy, right? And so we're all working collaboratively together to not only help those organizations, but also help monarch butterflies, you know, which a lot of people did not know. Like, Oklahoma is like, well, they love it here, you know, they love it here. And the bigger picture is for people to really understand, like, about the monarch butterfly. Because when I really think about that, I think about me as a person. I think about having this opportunity to navigate and travel. And so with the monarch butterfly, it's the same thing. And then there are people that are helping you along the way, right? And that's how I got to this place right here. People that were helping me along the way. So when we talk about this collaboration of schools, churches, businesses, and organizations, it's all of us working together collaboratively, helping one another along the way. So when you get ready to put on your OU or your OSU t-shirt next time and rally up for the big game, I want you to also think about how you can rally up for the community. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for that. Happy holidays. All right, next we have Leah Wilkins. She is an environmental law attorney who works with community-based organizations to achieve grassroots solutions to social, economic, and environmental issues. After graduating with her master's of environmental law and policy, Ms. Wilkins interned at the US EPA and then worked at a regional law firm in DC. She's going to present on the environment and sustainability for us. Thank you, Althea. Back to you now.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I know, guys, this is the last little presentation, okay? And then we'll get back home to our warm beds, all right? So I'm an environmental attorney and a sustainability advisor. And I love that we just had LaTasha and Sean talks first, because they've given you concrete examples of what we can do in our community to bring in those ecosystem ideas, right? So we know how to incorporate it, whether it's a community garden or whether it's just creating public spaces, going back to what Deborah talked about, where we can appreciate and understand and get the benefits of nature, right? Well, there's even more to it. And so I'm gonna zoom you back out up to like 1,000 feet. Because while those are good concrete things to think about, there's a lot of other concepts that are floating around that also impact us that I think are important to understand, okay? So I entitled this one, You and the Environment, Intersectional Environmentalism and Why It Matters. Now, intersectional is kind of a buzzword, but it just means like we are more than just environments, right? We're also Black people, brown people, people of color. We are women, some of us are entrepreneurs, some of us are other professionals, right? But that means we have multiple interests, right? We're not just worried about what the environment's doing, but we're worried about, hey, if I'm an entrepreneur, how is this going to affect my business, right? So that's just understanding that we have multiple interests that are connected together. So this is the traditional community view of a community, right? You've got the environment on one side, society on another, and then economy, right? So we've got things like air and water, land, all the natural resources, and that's what we think of environment. Then we've got society, right? It's what we live in. It's all the things that we have to deal with day to day. So education, health, poverty, crime, right? Those are human interactions, right? Because we're in society. And then we've got the economy, right? And for a lot of us, this is where we want to put our focus, right? Because we want to be economically, we want to have products that make money and we want to be able to see a community thriving, right? And so we need this economic component as well, right? This is your traditional view. It's basic, it gets some points across, right? But not very helpful. Here's another view, right? And what I like about this is you can see all the interconnections, right? Because they're no longer in silos. They are in a web. Because we know that, you know what, if we have lead in our water, schools are going to do good, right? And if people don't get education, they can't get that job that makes that money, right? And if we have natural resources that are tainted, we can't get the health benefits that we need from nature, right? And that's going to obviously also impair people when they're trying to do work, right? So all these are interconnected. We're not just talking about, yes, I want clean air because clean air is good. It is good, but why is it good? Well, it affects us. And that way it's going to affect everything we do in society. And so when we're thinking about development and stuff, just going back to our first session when Gina was talking about like schools rely on property tax, right? To get money. Well, you need density to get that property tax base up, right? Well, people aren't going to come to your community if you have lead in your water, right? So these are all connected when we start talking about development. The other thing to think about here is going back to urban ecology, right? It's not just the interaction of people and natural systems, but people, natural systems, the built environment, and society, right? Because they all coexist together. So yes, we get wonderful gardens and stuff, but they're also coexisting in the greater city landscape, right? So not only do they have to, the butterflies that visit your pollinator garden aren't just there for the flowers. They also have to combat all the air pollution that might be because it's next to a highway or something, right? So the monarchs come through in October in Oklahoma. I don't know if you guys know that, but they follow the route of I-35 basically as they go down south. And it's really interesting because like the transportation department has like changed the way they do their mowing and stuff because we know that butterflies like certain weeds. So we can't mow right before the migration because they're not going to have anything to eat, So just thinking about things like this makes it a holistic picture that's much stronger. So we're not just benefiting, let's make this place look nice and beautiful, but we're saying we care about those butterflies moving through because they give us natural things. Pollinators are really important. We don't get food without pollinators, right? So if we want to make sure we have that food system there, we gotta take care of our pollinators. Taking care of pollinators is looking at how we do our infrastructure and how we've made our built environment. So it's not only supporting them, but it's supporting us in a holistic way. So this is why I really like this graphic. It's just showing everything is connected. Anything you can think about it, it's not just one interest. It's got a couple on the line there. There are consequences to ignoring the environment, right? We know this. We can go back, what, 6 years? Love Canal, closer to home, we've got Tar Creek. These are places like Superfund sites, brownfield sites. This is a map of actually our focus area. And it's a little pale here on the thing, but if you can see, this is 235, that is First Street. So this is our area. All these little crosses, brownfield sites, right? So that means there are places where that land was contaminated and there had to be cleanup and they had to develop a certain way with certain regulations from the federal government because of contamination. These little purple spots, Superfund sites. They're worse than brownfield sites, let me just tell you that. And I believe those two are just fenced off because they've cleaned it to a certain point and then they can just leave it alone because it's not healthy enough to build on. So going back to that idea that we got to heal our community and make sure it's well before we go developing, because there are consequences to ignoring the environment. So a couple ideas just to think about. So we're talking about communities interacting with the environment. That comes in a lot of shapes and sizes. A couple big ideas to think about. Environmental justice. Most of us have heard this term. It's got a very specific definition that the federal government uses. There's a big push right now actually in the federal government. The new EPA administrator, it's like his child. So you will see a lot of efforts going on by environmental justice. If you have a community organization, you're interested in grant money, come talk to me later on. There's a lot of opportunities for that. But I also like to call it environmental inequality, right? Because that kind of gets to the teeth of the matter. And it just means that there are environmental burdens that are primarily borne by vulnerable communities, AKA Black and brown people, poor people, tribes. Those are the big ones, right? Those people who can't move out of that community, you know? Those communities that only took the land because it was cheap, probably because it was tainted, you know? So that's something that we need to think about. There was an unequal distribution of risk and benefits that stem from interactions with the environment. So that could be anything from a chemical company dumping chemicals out back, selling the land and leaving. Or it could just be mining and different things like that will destroy the earth, contaminate it, and do things like that. It's very interesting and important because a lot of those sites end up being in Black and brown communities, right? So not only are we getting impacts from that, but now when we try to go develop, we have to contend with brownfield sites, right? We have to contend with how to treat these sites in a certain way. So all the contamination, different things like that don't harm us. But it's really important because if we consider ourselves a community that has this undue burden, right? We've got this huge burden on us because all these risks that other companies took and left, it's now in our backyard. How can we develop with the mind to that to kind of more balance that burden, right? Tree equity, great example of this, right? We live in a country where in most major cities, I can tell you the income of a community based on tree cover alone. Think about it. I know you see old, like great neighborhoods with huge trees, gorgeous. It's probably high income, right? The poorer communities, no trees, right? We've got concrete as far as we can see, right? That comes from two things, right? So 50s, 60s when they're doing development, right? We had redlining and all those discriminatory practices for Black and brown communities, right? So they didn't put in the resources they put into these other communities, right? But also then we dealt with urban renewal and different things like that. And those cleared a lot of the trees and everything else. We get health, psychological, and economic benefits from trees. You have a big tree in your yard, your utility bill is probably going to be lower, right? You have to catch a bus and walk 2 blocks to the bus station. If you have no tree cover, that trek is a lot more difficult than if you had tree cover, whether it's raining or if it's on a drought or something, you know? So things like that really affect us day to day. And when we're planning, again, something we need to consider. Also infrastructure. This is a very broad topic. I just want to point out a couple of things. We've talked about biomimicry a little bit, but also just the idea that we want to mimic natural systems. Why? Because nature's been doing it for thousands of years, right? My mom came to talk to my 5th grade class, and she said, we're drinking the same dinosaurs, or we're drinking the same water dinosaurs drank, right? Because the water cycle is cyclical. We just keep cleaning it and it comes back down, and that's what we have. If we're drinking the same water dinosaurs drank, nature knew how to clean that water, right? We have water we need to clean, maybe we should look to nature for ideas. So in practicality, we see that where instead of concrete canals, we see streams that have, you know, all those water plants and filtration systems, right? Things like that. That benefits us, because what if there's a flooding event? Instead of concrete that just, you know, lets the water go everywhere, we've got a natural filtration set up. So instead of huge sets of damage, it naturally filters out. So things like this, again, just when we're talking about development and how it impacts us, let's think about it in a holistic way. Not only are we talking about aesthetics and utility, but we're talking about ecology, right? Because we're interacting with the world around us. All right, and that's the end for me. You guys have any questions and stuff? I want to say this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot of stuff when we're talking about ecology and stuff. If anyone has any questions, my contact information is in all that stuff. Find me. We can have great conversations.
We were gonna go into like a couple of design applications, but given the time, I think maybe it would be great just to have our guests come up, and I don't know if there's questions.
There's only one on Zoom
Okay,
that Vanessa sent me, so I don't know if you guys can see any on Zoom. But Vanessa sent me a screenshot.
all right, and if any of our guests here today have questions, maybe this is just even a time to invite people on Zoom to ask questions, or in our chat here as well.
Well, here, let's start with this one, if you want me to. The one that I already have.
She was contact information.
Yeah, and the people that spoke today, we can send out contact information for everybody. This maybe, do you want to start? Yeah, I see Ashley's question. LaTasha and Sean, do you want to come up? Ashley also has a really long question that maybe you can spend a minute reading. And Joachim, do you have a question?
I do have a question.
Okay.
First of all, thank you all three for looking at the presentation.
Here, do you want to speak with the mic actually, because
Basically,
yeah, sorry, Joachim, I like invited them to read that and then.
That's all.
You just say it out loud. I have another one.
however,
Say it out loud.
nature into our housing developments that won't require developers to build an exclusive home association.
Well, say it out.
Oh, sure.
All right, yeah, read
Okay, so Ashley posted a question. Question about urban ecology and built environment and housing developments. Currently, our developed codes only require builders to install one Charlie Brown tree in the front yard. As we continue to develop living spaces, neighborhoods, etc., and in Northeast OKC, which has the most mature tree canopy in OKC, do you have suggestions on how we can bring nature into our housing developments that won't require developers to build an exclusive homeowners association to maintain those spaces?
Oh, yeah,
So that's a really, really good question. And the best answer I have is not, close your ears because you're the lawyer, is what we call the guerrilla warfare style. And basically what you can do is, in most homeowner associations love the idea of having gardens because it helps the social, like the local property values and stuff go up. And what we recommend at the park, and when we talk about that exact issue, is you're like, well, buy a little pack of native seeds, make a little garden, make it look like it's an intentional garden, grow stuff there. Then your neighbors get to see all the butterflies, all the things coming up in your yard, and like, oh, how do we get that? Then you slowly change the culture of the homeowner association. By that point, you can say, oh, well, I would like to replace this tree with something native or with something that can entice this cool looking butterfly that we have in this area. Then you've basically changed the whole culture of that small area. Don't think big, think small.
Yep. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna talk legally, okay? So forget I'm a lawyer for a second. I actually agree with that approach. And just a small story. So I planted wildflowers this past year. The whole time they were growing in early April and June. Mom was like, are you sure? Those look like weeds. They look like weeds. Are you sure they're gonna grow into something? I'm like, yeah, they're gonna grow. Listen, July and August, I was getting compliments up and down the block, okay? They were huge flowers about this tall, but they were beautiful. So I agree with that. Trees can be expensive. I know for a lot of people, that is not an option to get a mature tree, just, plop it in the ground. We can't really do that. But you can do smaller things like pollinated gardens and things like that using local and the right types for the ecosystem you're in.
I was going to say too, and this is kind of like guerrilla kind of style too. There are a lot of different programs and organizations that do tree giveaways, and I think also there's an opportunity there for us to come together in terms of the intentionality of like how we're actually using trees too, but also keeping in mind what it is that you are rooting into the ground that is there in your system. So I would also say, check out other organizations that are, especially here in Oklahoma, there are a couple, and I can get that information to you, that are all about specifically with getting trees into spaces. And I think there was something in here about like developed codes or different things like that. I mean, that's another thing too. Like for me, I feel like in our state, like we have a lot of different codes and different things like that that need to be changed. And, I know that it's difficult conversation, and sometimes this is the way we've been doing things. But I think that this is an opportunity for us as voters and also for policymakers to really sit down and have a conversation about what is really needed now, and how can we be responsible in terms of decision makers and those that vote in the decision makers, and being able to make sure that we are working collaboratively in order to create a state that is where community is everybody.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up with that. I think those are all great points. And the development codes are kind of the lowest standard of trying to make sure people do plant some plants and create some green spaces. But for the development process, if you come together and have a kind of green space and ecological agenda, and then you go to the city, kind of showing this is your plan, this is how it's going to benefit, the green space is going to benefit the people that live here, you're likely to be able to get that passed. They do want to see a minimum, but maybe there's a different kind of tree or a different kind of planting that's requires less maintenance. So it really takes a team to come together to think about those things.
Yeah,
Jakob, did you?
I mean, just to follow up on that. No, I think one thing I do photography in a way of seeing space, and really appreciate all what you guys did. Because particularly if you look at the area that we're looking at for development, there's already existing forestry, right? So I think my encouragement, and so this is not just here in Oklahoma City. I've seen it in Houston and other places where there is lack of development or investment in Black and brown communities. Forestry takes place, which is fantastic. So I think my encouragement for all of us here that are interested in that area, but making sure to maintain those trees that are in existence. I know it kind of costs a little, right, to build around a tree. So in what ways can we incentivize whoever is going to develop that area to maintain some of those mature trees and forestries that they are? So if you look at a map, a Google map of that area, you will see greenery, right? So that's our thought. So.
And so, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, just to follow up on that, I appreciate your feedback on that. I think, Deborah, you're exactly right. The question is more for developers and not for like homeowners individually. So, if we have an opportunity to inform processes on this particular project, my suggestion would be to hold developers to a higher standard when it comes to the ecology of the urban core, and so to prioritize those trees and forestry in their developments without creating homeowners associations that are exclusive to the neighbors, so to maintain. And so I'm not sure how necessarily to do that, but I do want that to be in the conversation as we continue to inform this process, if possible.
So if I could kind of piggyback on Ashley's comment, because I think it's timely, and I think I'm gonna make some assumptions about things I've heard about. I know that we've talked about one of the outputs here really being the establishment of of some sort of urban design district or overlay, and I do think that's a good way, because overlay design districts and things like that typically deal with exterior facing, not interior stuff. And all of these are the kinds of things that you can maybe try and address there. So the thing that I think we have to look at and pay attention to is if there aren't some strategic ways to both give the benefits of a lot of things that have been discussed here, while minimizing or allowing flexibility for what will essentially be drivers and costs, right? And there might be some ways where we say, well, if from a private sector standpoint, like the market's going to sort of do what it's going to do in this community, then we at least want to put some things in place that drive these kinds of assets and this kind of emphasis, and it's going to be more costly. But I think there's a double-edged sword that means that, also for existing residents or for people who might have less means, but be the kind of multi, generational mixed income community that we want to create. It's also, these things can also drive costs there. I mean, and I know there's the premise of, well, these aren't necessarily things that have to cost a lot, but when you start talking about how it executes to having, requirements for incorporating ecology, anything that's different from the norm tends to create a cost or make development more expensive. So I'm a huge fan and proponent of this, and I'm a huge fan of thinking that we might be able to create some very unique momentum for restoring some of the environmental sort of injustices and inequalities that have taken place in this target area. But I think we have to kind of be intentional about walking that balance and trying to set a framework that will do that, that can be beneficial to us for setting expectations for just outright market-based private development, but also doesn't handicap the kind of investment in the community that we want to see by those who have been connected to it or in it for so many years.
I
So
really,
basically, you're voting for the Charlie Brown tree. Is that what I'm hearing, Cindy? No?
I like Charlie Brown trees on Christmas, but other than that, I'm voting for some really comprehensive strategies, but just saying that we got to be careful about like what standards we set, because they may make it difficult for us to also maintain affordability, right? So that's
I'm
what
just
I'm saying.
joking. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
We have a couple of thoughts on Facebook to attribute to this as well, if I can chime in. After listening to the Northeast OKC Think Tank podcast, there was an idea of teaching urban students how food, plants, and animals are grown. Would it be worth reaching out to the FFA to empower their members by bridging the gap between urban and rural Oklahoma? That's one. Second comment, is this the effort where the ecological agenda will be created, or is there another one on the horizon? And how will the timing keep pace with the private market? Two thoughts there.
I'm actually not sure on the first one how to answer that. Erin, are you familiar with what the question is?
That is the connecting.
Because you actually played a big role in that think tank project, so I'm just
Right.
wondering if you know how to, I'm not exactly sure.
So, yeah. I think it would be, so they're asking would be worthwhile to try to make that connection with the FFA from rural to urban communities. And I think we just need to take into consideration that they have certain logistics that they have to work with because they focus on rural areas. And so if we want to do that, we can't get these. So if we're going to do that, we need to, I think it's worthwhile. If we're able to do that, we just need to ensure that we have a contact. It's all about making connections, right? If there's a way to make connections, we should do it. But we do need to understand that they focus on rural areas, and our area is not rural. So if they have something in place where they are able to connect rural to urban, we should go for it. Why not? The other question is this the only aspect of ecology? No, this is just our introduction to make sure that we have a basic understanding of urban ecology and how it's going to play a role in this process. We're going to have other sessions that we're going to apply everything that we're learning in these sessions to the vision that we're going to be creating. So be taking notes, because this is part of what we're going to learn and incorporate into the knowledge that the community has that we're going to implement into creating the vision.
Yeah, and I just want to mention too, there are other like ecological efforts in the city. I think this, and maybe as part of parks, pieces of the city's agenda on ecological infrastructure and focuses. There's other organizations that focuses. So I think that this project isn't kind of solely about that, but this is kind of a basis of understanding urban space. And we can make suggestions, especially for this focus area or beyond during this project, that we would want to see.
And I just wanted to add that, we have, I want to make sure that I say this tactfully. We have been culturally conditioned to do more with less. And at some point, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be given more and make it great. So for me, my keeper of the flame is to not be okay with the Charlie Brown tree because it may cause the road to get tough. My keeper of the flame charge is to say, no, Charlie Brown trees are not welcomed here, because my expectation and my standard is this. And so if we choose to work with other people and developers that are not on board with what we want and what we see, then they are not for this project. So for me, I feel like at some point we have to, I mean, they're getting ready to release something through maps with the city parks and different things like that. And so my thing is, if they can do that, then for me, it can be done. So you're just changing it from one entity to another. And so I just want to, you know, encourage all of us to be open to thinking outside the box and really be open to getting what we really want, you know, what we really want to see, because that's really what's going to create the change, you know, because if not, then it'll just be another development, and people will come and people will go, but we won't see the sustainability because, you know, and not to deter us, you know, I want to see the teachers with whom I work with have homes in the community in which they work in. You know, I want to see the lawyers and the doctors that provide services for the teachers with I work with have their practices that are lucrative in the community in which they work in and serve. You know, I want to be able to have grocery stores and other different types of consumer outlets that are to my standard and the things that I like in the community in which I live and work in, and not have to settle for something less than because it's never been done. So.
And Sean, did you have a comment? I feel like to something earlier. I can see kind of like something I could see.
That was everything that I also agree with. And on that same note, the Charlie Brown tree is another symptom or another example of like the shifting baseline idea that I talked about, is we lose sight of what was and what should have been, and the idea that we have every right to have large trees in our neighborhood. We have every right to enjoy the outdoors. We have every right to do these things. But because for so long we've been told that, oh, well, that's not for us, that's not for this area, we begin to believe that that's just the case. No one actually is defending that, and no one actually is saying that there's no way we can change it. I think that's really important to recognize. Like, these limitations that have been, these limitations that are more cultural than legal are just that. They can be changed because culture is meant to be changed. Culture is flexible. We have every right to change these things. So why aren't we trying to if we don't like it?
Yeah. No, did you have a question earlier on that you wanted to ask? Or
Well,
okay. Oh, is somebody on? Oh, Julie, we can't hear her. How come we can't hear her? She's not muted, but maybe her mic on her side doesn't work.
Julie, did you have something to say?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, yes, perfect.
All right, wonderful. I just want to thank all of our presenters. You guys have made my day. You are so awesome, beautiful individuals. I appreciate everything that you shared with us. It was very enlightening. My heart is just excited about the opportunities. I totally agree. And as I look at the work that we are called to do in this committee, I see it more from a community point of view rather than a developer. I am working with the developer, but I think our role is more to align our thoughts, recommendations with the desires of the community. So that's where I stand. And for that reason, I totally agree with what you just said, LaTasha and Sean. It is about not looking at the limitations, but looking at the possibilities and the opportunities. And you all presented so much to us today to challenge us to do just that. So if that means going to the foundation, which is the code, city code, and challenging those revisions there, and Ophelia, I believe you mentioned that too, Ophelia. If it means going to the code and readdressing what, or aligning that code, city code, with our desires, I think that's what we've got to do. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And we are talking about sustainability for the future of this community and for the generations to come. And I would love to, and I hope this is part of the process, that our presenters would be consultants as we develop specific ways to incorporate what we've learned today, that you all will continue to be a part of our group, possibly as a consultant, to evaluate what we may come up with and allow, you know, your thoughts to be incorporated, or especially our attorney, so that we know that what we are presenting is something that is feasible. So love you guys, appreciate you, and thank you so much. And thanks to the organizers today. Thank you so much for this day. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Okay.
All right.
That was great. Thank you, Julie, for your comment. Thank you guys for joining. We appreciate it. Thank you, LaTasha, and Sean, and Afia for presenting. It was awesome. And Deborah. Just going. All right, guys. We're gonna close this session. I'm gonna send out a link for the assignment today. If you joined us online, we will see you at the next session. Yeah, I'm gonna send out the homework assignment if you joined us online.
Okay.
Just to reiterate. All right, guys. We'll see you at the next session. Thanks.
Thank you guys.